I want to share with you my personal Emmett Till story. This evening, my daughter took me to a movie, and I didn't know what we were going to be seeing, but it happened to be the Emmett Till story. And it awakened my own story, something that I don't talk about. My mother shared it with me simply because I asked her one question. I asked her, why was it that all my other sisters and brother were born in Lincolnton, Georgia, and I was born in Anniston, Alabama. And I asked her also, how did we get to Chattanooga, Tennessee? And my mother told me the story of how there was an incident that took place in Lincolnton, Georgia, and my father was a minister, a Baptist preacher, but he also did a lot of other work to support the family, so he wasn't living off of a clergy salary. And he happened to work for this white family. And in this white family, there was a woman who was sort of rumored that she liked black men. And so she apparently had an affair with a black man, and she got pregnant. And she sort of calculated that it may not be her husband's child. And so what she did was she claimed that she was raped by a black man, and the black man worked for her. And so the Ku Klux Klan and her husband, who also was a Ku Klux Klan member, they went looking for every black man that she gave the description of. And my father met that description. Plus, he had done work there on the place. So the way in which my father found out is another white woman sent word to my aunt, Mary Lizzie, and told her to go and tell my mother to tell my father not to come home, because if he came home, they were going to pull him out of the house that night and lynch him. And in the meantime, this woman arranged, a white woman, arranged for my mother to leave with, my mother was pregnant with me, to leave with my other four siblings, three sisters and one brother. And what they did was that they took my father through the Underground Railroad, which was through Atlanta. And yes, Underground Railroads were still in existence. And they took my mother and with me, she's pregnant with me, and my three sisters and my brother up through the Alabama, Georgia to Alabama. And where we ended was in Anniston, Alabama. And my father went on to Atlanta, and then he joined us later in Anniston, Alabama. And the preachers are part of the Underground Railroad. The preachers, it was a heavily supportive network of ministers at that particular time. Those black ministers, they had it together. And they had a place for us to stay when we got to Anniston. And my father came later. One day, right after that, because like I said, my mother was pregnant with me. Right after that, my mother had me in Anniston, Alabama. That's why I was the only person that was born outside of Georgia in my family. And two men came to her door, and they asked her, they were looking for Julius Howard, and they said they were insurance men and that they had a policy that they needed to pay out, and they wanted to make sure he got the money. And so my mother was very wise. At that particular time, you had to be wise in order to survive down south. And she told them, she said, well, she said, she said, I don't know Julius Howard. She said, but I tell you what. She said, give me 3 days to ask around. She said, I should know something in about 2 days. And she said, but give me 3. And she said, I'm going to check around and see if I can find him, because I know he wants that money. She had to be smart, y'all. We had to be smart back then. And just because men had to say yes, sir, and no, sir, it wasn't because they were dumb. They were smart. They knew how to survive. And so my mother sent word to my father's job and told him what had happened. Of course, he knew immediately that they were looking for him. And so my father came home and he said, don't take anything out of the house because they're probably sitting and looking. And he said, we're just going to get in the car just like we would in any other normal situation. And it was on a Sunday. And my mother shared all this with me. And she said, we left in the car. And I was a baby in arms, just a few months old. And she said, we left there and we came to Chattanooga, Tennessee. But this time my father was able to escape with us. He was not able to do so when my mother left with me in her womb in Lincolnton, Georgia. Like I said, we went one way, Daddy went the other way. And when we got to Chattanooga, thank God for the network of Black ministers. And some of those ministers are dead and gone now. But they were from the Olivet Baptist Church, and I think one of them was Reverend Rod Richards, I believe. And those preachers, didn't have a place for us immediately when we got there, but they said, just get here. And my father was just interested in making sure that he didn't get lynched and nothing happened to his family. And so when we got there, they said, well, we don't have any place for you tonight, because my father got there sooner than the morning, and because he drove all night long. We left like at early part of the morning, after midnight, and we got there like early that morning. It wasn't that far from Anniston to Chattanooga. But when we got there, the Spann family, and some of you may know the Spann family, if you went to Booker T, they had a chicken coop, and there was no longer any chickens in it. And they just told my father to park outside of the chicken coop. And the next day, they still didn't quite have a place for us to stay. And so my mother and father went in and they cleaned up that chicken coop. And that chicken coop was full of chicken shit. It was everywhere. And we slept in the car the first night. And the next 2 or 3 nights, we slept in that chicken coop until, like I said, they could get the place ready for us. And that's how I became a resident of Chattanooga, Tennessee. That's how my family became Tennesseans. They were Georgian, going all the way back to many generations. And so when you talk about Black history, I am Black history. I'm a part of that Black history. And they came looking for my father everywhere. But those Black ministers, they protected us. And they kept us out of sight for about the space of about a year. And that is why my father was able to live. Because had they found him, they would have lynched him. So it turns out that no one raped the white woman. No one. Everybody in the Black community knew that she loved Black men. And they knew that what she had said was a lie. And so tonight when my daughter took me to see Emmett Till, all of that flashed before me. And at the end of the movie, I realized the racial trauma that I had gone through. And it didn't just stop there in Chattanooga. It continued. Going to a all black segregated school, taking that bus to school in the morning, and well, actually not taking the bus, I'm sorry, watching the white kids take the bus. I'm a little emotional right now, so please bear with me. Watching the white kids take the bus while we walked at least a mile or a little over a mile from where we live to Chickamauga Elementary School. And watching that bus pass by us, and the kids on the bus would holler, niggers, niggers, niggers. And the bus driver would drive as close as he could to the ditch so that we would have to jump over into the ditch to keep from being hit. Getting to school and finding out that the teachers would have us go through the books and bend back the pages. We got, like, if the white kids had the 5th edition, we had the 2nd edition of the book. They kept us behind. But those black teachers were so dedicated. They were so dedicated. And some of y'all remember them, Miss Taylor, Miss Locke, Miss Kirby. Oh my goodness, I don't want to leave out anybody. But it was just Miss Harden. Those teachers were dedicated, and they would take out the pages of the books that said nigger. And sometimes they may not have enough books for us because they refused to allow us to see that in a book. But they took those editions of books that were, like I said, if the white kids had the 5th, we had the 2nd. They would take the 2nd edition, and they would make sure that we knew everything we had to know. We did recitations by then. Everything was by memory, and they taught us remember things, conjugation of verbs and English. There is not one person who graduated from Chickamauga Elementary and went to Booker T. Washington who did not learn good English. Miss Edmondson made sure that you knew English. And those teachers made sure they did everything that they possibly could to make sure we had a quality education in the midst of so much racism. And I got the opportunity, a very rare opportunity, to come to Washington, D.C. during the time when my father and my mother were separated. And again, due to racism, my father worked for Chattanooga Sausage Company, and he got his arm hooked in the machine, and he lost the use of one of his hands for over a couple years. And so they fired him. Rather than pay him for the damage that they did, they fired him. And so my father was a man who was a very proud man. He took nothing from nobody. He worked hard. And I saw my father scrap iron, bale paper, whatever it took to feed us. Because he wasn't about to go to anybody and ask them for anything. But when that happened to him, it had an impact on him that had an impact on my mother and his relationship. And as a result of that, my mother and father separated. And unfortunately, they never got back together. And so during that time of them being separated, a precious soul, Mother Mary McGee, who's one of the mothers of the Way of the Cross Church in Washington, D.C., she was there in Chattanooga. She had come to visit. And I was at my sister's house at that time, and she said to her, she said, God has a purpose for that child's life, and she's supposed to go with me to Washington, D.C. for a time and a season. And my mother said to her, my sister said to her, she said, over my mother and daddy's dead body. She said, ain't nowhere in the world my mother's going to let her baby go. And she said, I'm going to go on a fast. And she said, I'm going to go on a 5-day fast. And she said, when I come off this fast, your mother and your father are going to let her go. And they're not even going to know why they did it. And when she came off that fast, she went and talked to my mother and said, I want to take her with me while you and, your husband, Reverend Howard, are getting things together. And she said, anytime you want her to come back, she can come back. We'll bring her back. And my mother said no. And my father, he didn't say yes either. And so she came back to my mother again. And she kept fasting. She kept fasting. She kept praying. And finally, my mother said, well, I'm going to let her go just for about 2 or 3 months. And she said, well, okay. She said, whenever you want her to come back, she said, I promise you. And I got on that train, that Chattanooga choo-choo train. And I came to Washington, D.C. And that woman, Mother Mary McKee, God-fearing, anointed woman, one who saw into the spirit realm, that woman became to me something so precious that I can't even consider her gold, because it's more than gold. And her daughter and her son-in-law, Deacon Robert and Ruth Alford, they became to me my godparents. And shortly after I got there, Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. And I will never forget when I heard that Dr. Martin Luther King was dead, and knowing my own history, the trauma, you don't know. Those of you who are white, you don't know the trauma that Black people have been through. But we survived. And so instead of applauding us, you want us to forget our history. But how in heaven, earth, or hell can we forget trauma? And I remember running, and I didn't know where I was running. But I couldn't stop running until I got to school. Finally, I ended up at school. And Connie Mitchell, one of my teachers, Mrs. Mitchell, and Miss Strong, Brenda Strong, they sat down and they talked to me. And I remember Mrs. Mitchell, after I told her my story, she told me this. She said, fight with your head. And she did this to me. She said, use your head. Fight with your head. She said, you're smart. She said, we got the results of your test, because I was tested when I came to Washington, D.C. to see where I would be placed. And I got placed at McKinley High School, because at that particular time, that's where they sent, the kids who were, I guess they thought were college bound. I don't know if there were any other schools, but I know McKinley was. And I remember her telling me, use your head to fight with. Use your head. And she said, not your emotions. And so I began to put my emotions back and to use my head. Because I realized that when you're emotional, it's hard to think. And you do things and you wonder why, as African Americans, we get angry. And yes, I felt like burning something down as well. I felt like, I can't even explain how I felt. And so tonight, with my daughter surprising me and thinking that she was doing something really nice for me and taking me to see the Emmett Till, it really brought back trauma that perhaps I needed to deal with. And I said, God, I'm not even going to go any further than her table when I get back. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to share it. I got to get it out. And you wonder why I do so much for kids. You wonder why I do the things that I do. You know, I'm a lifelong member of the NAACP. My brother was one of the presidents of the NAACP. He was one of the ones who sat in at the lunch counters. I was young. I was a little girl. But my brother, I thought he was a hero. I thought he was a hero, and he was a hero because he sat there and he demonstrated along with the others. And so when I see an America that's still racist, when I see the political scenery and it's still racist, it goes to the very core of my soul. It does. And I want you to know that. When I see that a Black woman with the credentials that I have, not given an equal place in a party that I chose to be a part of. See, because years ago, Blacks used to be Republicans. Yeah, they used to. And when I think about the trauma that I went through in the Republican Party, and when I see people who are less qualified be welcomed and elected, and when I think about the credentials that I have, the fact that I've taught political science, the fact that I am one of only 2 African Americans to ever be voted outstanding professor of the year of the University of Tennessee, a university that we could not attend years ago, but I taught there. A university where Black people could not walk on that side of the street. You had to cross over on the other side. You couldn't come through that campus. When I see my picture on the wall of the University of Tennessee, it's not for my pride that there's only 2 Black professors' pictures that are up there. When I see that, I see it as a milestone for little boys, little girls, for students there to be able to say, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. This is why I devoted all of my life to making sure that others are okay. I've also devoted my life to not hating white people. Do I have cause to hate you? Yes, I do. I do. I do. But it's not a cause I wish to be a part of. I will never hate you. And particularly what has happened to me within the Republican Party. I won't hate you. It's not right. But God said at some point in time, Jean, I'm going to make it right. And I'm going to cause those who sat back quietly and didn't say anything and saw those who did say something get crucified. Yeah, there were whites who stood with me, but they were crucified. Mary Louise Cotton Collins, I love her so much, but she's dead and gone. But she fought for me. And there are others. But I want to say this to those of the generation now. Don't hate. Get something in your head, as my teachers taught me, and take the hatred up out of your heart. You can't operate in hatred. And use these opportunities. Don't let these opportunities pass you by. Get an education. This drugs, I was there when the drug war started. I was. They planted drugs in the community of Blacks. And they said that the kids that came from mothers who were addicted were born as drug babies. Y'all, that wasn't true. That wasn't true. It was a lot of things that happened. I demonstrated on that campus. Wheaton College, I was one of the biggest ones that fought. And some of the things that I'm looking that others are enjoying now, it's as a result of things that we fought for. And I remember my afro was so big that I thought that, I never knew that I was 5 feet tall. I thought I was like 5'4" or something like that, 5'5", because of my afro. But I was a part of that march. I was a part of that fight for civil rights. And I'm very proud of it. And I'm challenging you, those of you who are white, who are proclaiming to know God, and are proclaiming to be my friend and my sister. I'm challenging you to step up to the plate and tell me why, even in this day, there's still discrimination. And God said something to me tonight. He said, you go back to that Republican Party. I had moved to the middle, and he said, you stay in the middle until I tell you to go back. But he said, I want you to go back to that Republican Party. And I said, God, are you sure? And God said, I want you to recall that there were more for you than were against you. And no, some of those who were with me couldn't speak. Some of them didn't speak. Some of them wouldn't speak out for what was happening. But God said, that's okay. He said, that's okay. You go back. You go back. And that was something I didn't expect for God to say to me after watching the Emmett Till movie. I didn't expect that. And he said, but you go back with the same fervor that you have. You don't go back to conform and to be a yes Negro. You go back with a spirit of love, but awakening. And you work within the bounds and within the boundaries to bring about a party that returns to its roots of Lincoln. We have Lincoln Day dinner all over the country. But God said, you go back and you make this a party, a true party of Lincoln, President Abraham Lincoln. You make it the Republican Party that Dr. Martin Luther King used to be a part of. You make it the Republican Party that blacks used to be a part of. Because when I came into the Republican Party, like I said, my teachers, my principals, just about everybody black were Republicans. God said, you go back. You stir up the spirit of the old ancestors of the Republican Party. And you make sure that you take a stand for what is right, for what is just, for what is equal, and what is the divine plan of God. And God said tonight, he said, I want you to wipe your tears. I want you to empty out the trauma. And I don't want you to pass it down to LaShonda. But she knows because you've told her the story. But she has not been bitter and you've taught her not to be bitter. But I want you to go back and make a difference. So as of this day, I return to the Republican Party. I don't need blacks to sanction me. But you better understand why I've returned. You need to understand why. And to my white brothers and sisters in that party who have embraced me, I love you. But you're going to have to take a stand too. You cannot tell me that you love God and you're Christians and you stood back and saw things happening to me. That's in the past, but I'm coming back. And God said, I'm going to give them an opportunity to do what is right and what is just. He said, because judgment is getting ready to fall. And it's not the kind of judgment you think it is. For God has a time and a season. He bids his time to make things right. This is the hour of reckoning. It is the hour of making what was wrong right. I love you all. I hold no animosity, no hate, no nothing within my heart. God knows I don't. God knows I don't. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you. I love you.